This is the second in a series of videos intended for Maximo administrators, power users, business process owners, and leadership. This one includes a description of the Maximo configuration tools. This is not meant to be an in-depth description of every configuration setting inside Maximo. I'm only going to describe what we're currently using. I hope what follows turns out to be a good balance between what you need to know and way too much information. I'm going to start by zooming out a bit so I can show a larger picture. I'll take a role-based approach here, beginning with the things everyone can do, and then what power users can do, and finally what Maximo developers can do. My first key point is, most of the things in these lists can be seen as building blocks. Building blocks used to add features and functionality, tools that can be used to satisfy business requirements. Knowing what they can do and how they can be used together is the key to everything. The list on the left are configuration tools available to all Maximo users. Anyone can save custom queries, configure their start centers, download data, and create and publish their own reports. I've already produced tutorials about that stuff, so I'm going to skip to the next column. Analysts and power users typically have permissions to create and publish key performance indicators, develop complex reports, and configure all sorts of Maximo records related to work management, timekeeping, and more. There's already a standalone tutorial for the key performance indicator stuff, so I'll skip that. For the reports, any reporting tool can be used to develop custom Maximo reports. The tables and columns on the back end are named really well, and the Maximo front end allows you to see the details on every field, making a report developer's life much easier. The BERT reporting tool is packaged with Maximo, Business Intelligence Reporting Tool. And that's what we use for most of our custom reports inside Maximo. For example, the report used to approve Maximo timesheets, that's a BERT report. Calendar shifts and person groups, or crew records, can be used to coordinate and balance available resources. Most notably, these records, along with work orders, can be used to maintain schedules for current and future work. System definitions are used to categorize and report different types of assets. We're currently using service group records for the facility's service request process, and we're using service level agreements to automatically set the target finish dates on the facility's work orders. MX Loader is a very useful tool when you need to load a large data set into Maximo. It can also be used to do a bulk update on existing records. You should watch the MX Loader tutorial if you want to learn more about that. The things in the right column are the meat and potatoes for this tutorial. None of these things are very complicated, except for automation scripting and more complex queries. Just about anyone can use these tools. You don't need a computer science degree. I'm going to start with the global or system-wide settings. The system properties is one place we go to change global settings in Maximo. And they allow us to do things like adjust the maximum number of rows allowed on a query. This is why you only get 200 rows on a single page when you're on a list view. Other global settings are the timeout. So this setting tells us the session will automatically time out after 2 hours. There are more administration settings in the administration menu. When I go into organizations, I can see that our Maximo system's configured for a single organization. When I drill into that, now I can view the options for this organization. And there's a lot of things in the options. There's work order options. I can go into the work order options and edit rules. Which fields are editable on a work order based on the status of the work order. This is why asset and location, things like that, are locked down when the status is changed to approved. Other organization options include options for downtime, how the actual start date is set on work orders, whether or not a warranty dialog box is presented if we change a status on a work order with an asset that has a warranty, and a lot of other options for features and functionality we're not currently using in Maximo. One thing I'd like to point out is ignore storeroom availability for work order status. That checkbox is checked because we want to disable all those automatic features in Maximo out of the box related to inventory, warehousing, and supply chain. The next important thing I'd like to show you are the options related to PMs. This allows us to change when work orders are generated and how meter-based PMs are generated. And, probably most importantly, the options for the automatic PM work order generation process. The auto number setup configuration settings allow us at the system level to change how certain records are auto numbered. For example, I'll show you the job plan. And this is why when you create a new job plan, it's got a prefix of JP. The system settings at the org level include options for calendars, GL configuration, classification, how timers are set, how person records are represented, whether revision control is enabled for job plans, and some other options. A single Maximo platform can host multiple organizations, each with their own set of data, each with their own GL account structure. Here at Grant PUD, we only have a single organization, which makes things easier for Maximo administrators. Maximo also supports having multiple sites at a single organization. Here at Grant PUD, we only have one site named Hydro, which also makes things easier for Maximo administrators. Knowing that we're a single organization, single site Maximo implementation is important for Maximo administrators because that knowledge helps you make configuration changes using these configuration tools to meet business requirements within the boundaries of single org, single site. I think that pretty much covers the Maximo system properties. Of course, there's a lot more in there that I didn't show you, but let's move on to objects and attributes. So let's navigate to database configuration, and I'll do an open search, and these are all of the objects inside the Maximo system. Object is just another word for table. I can show you the attributes, which is a fancy term for columns on the table. Here you can see I've opened up the work order object and I'm showing you all of the attributes. And I will demonstrate this in more detail during a later video, but adding new columns to a table is really easy with Maximo. You simply just click the new row button and fill in the fields. When I drill into one of these attributes, I can show you its properties. This is the second foreman field we added to the Maximo system. Every attribute or table column needs to have a type, a length, and a title. It may have a domain to provide a pick list. In this case, this is a table domain, and this is what it looks like. It's populated with all of the active person IDs in Maximo. The next thing in the list is relationships. Those are also under database configuration, and I'm still looking at the work order object or table, and when I click on the relationships tab for the work order object, I can see all the relationships related to the work order table. If I search for the relationship records we created, I can show you an example where we related the GCGL maintenance object, which is where our GL account records are stored, to the work order. Time for a quick recap. We talked about Maximo system properties, which are global settings for the Maximo platform. We talked about objects and attributes, which are tables and columns on tables, and how relationships are created to relate different attributes between different objects. And we'll circle back to objects and attributes especially when we're talking about other configuration tools. But for now we're going to detour out to object structures. Maximo object structures are for integrations and reporting. When I search the object structures application, I see a result of all the object structures that exist inside the Maximo system. If I narrow this list down to just the object structures consumed by reporting, I can see the object structures created for reporting purposes. And I can narrow the list even more for reporting structures for work order tracking. Now I'll open a couple of these and show you what they look like. So here's a good example of a reporting object structure. Maximo administrators set this up in advance so that users can create their own reports. In fact, I'm pretty sure there are several object structures in work order tracking that are available for use for users to create their own custom reports. So let me show you what that looks like in work order tracking. So here I've narrowed down the list to just the work orders that have been completed by the Maintenance Center Electrical Foreman, and when I click on the Create Report button and click the Content tab, you can see there are other object structures in the list available to me when I create my report. The next thing on my list are domains. This is how you get pick lists. So I've navigated to the work order tracking application. I'll use Primary Foreman. When I click on the Select Value icon, I get a list of all of the Primary Foreman values in Maximo. So let's go see what this looks like on the back end. I'll navigate to the Domains application, and I'll look for the Primary Foreman domain. So here's our list of Primary Foreman. And if we wanted to add another Primary Foreman value, we just click the New Row button and add the value and a description, and then it'll be available for the Primary Foreman field anywhere in Maximo where the Primary Foreman field is used. Next, I'm going to circle back to the database configuration because I want to show you that field and how it's connected to a domain at the attribute level. When I expand the Primary Foreman field or attribute, I can show you that it uses that GC Foreman domain. Next, I'd like to talk about the different types of domains we can create and what their purpose is. The types of domains we typically use are ALN, which is alphanumeric, which is pretty much the same as upper. And then there's numeric domains, which means it's just a number, or a table domain, which means the pick list comes from a query fetching rows from a table, or a crossover domain, which is designed to cross over information from one type of record to another, like preventative maintenance records to work orders. Let's try to bring up an example of each type. GC. The GC compliance domain is ALN or upper. The values are alphanumeric, meaning you can mix letters and numbers. So you see we have SIP, FERC, Cyber, NERC. That's what you see in the pick list. Let's find another one. GC risk level is a numeric domain where you only have two values, the number 1 or number 2. And of course we use the description to describe what a number 1 means. I think I already showed you the second Foreman domain, but I'll show it to you again. It's a table domain, and it fetches all of the active person records from the person table and populates those in the second Foreman pick list. And of course the last type is a crossover. So here's a crossover domain designed to cross over information from the PM object to the work order object. Scrolling down, I can show you here's 1 through 5 of 7 field values that start on the PM and land on the work order when a work order is generated from that PM. If we added a new field to the PM application and we wanted that value to exist on a work order when a work order is generated from the PM, we would add a crossover field to this crossover domain. That covers object structures and domains and lookups. Now for the really fun one. To get to the application designer, you go to System Configuration, Platform Configuration, and Application Designer. I happen to know work order tracking is the WOTRAC application. But if you don't know it, you can use the description fields to help you search for the application you're looking for. For this demonstration, I'm going to open up something that's a little simpler. Let's try Asset. So this is the workspace for the Asset application in the Application Designer. The fact that the Application Designer has the same look and feel as the regular applications in Maximo makes being a developer a lot easier. It just has a few different buttons on it, so let's talk about those first. Of course, we've got the regular standard Maximo stuff. There's also an export and import button, and I'm going to circle back to those in just a few minutes. There's a control palette button that brings up all the controls, and I'll circle back to this one pretty soon as well. Then we have a control properties button and edit dialog button. When I click this, I see all of the dialog boxes that present themselves in the asset application. So yes, you can edit those dialog boxes as well. And then we have the usual delete, cut, copy, and paste controls. The Select Action drop-down menu has some special things in it for the application designer. I usually like to say toggle show all controls and toggle show conditional UI controls, because this adds all of the elements that are normally hidden, like default value controls. The other interesting thing in the Select Action menu is the messages. This actually brings up a list of all of the BMX messages inside Maximo. A full tutorial of the application designer would probably take about 2 hours, and I don't have time for that, so I'm just skimming the surface here to give you an introduction. I'd like to spotlight a few things. First thing is this presentation control. When I click on the properties for that control, I can see that it's got a where clause. This is the default query that runs whenever you navigate to this application, so it only shows you records that match the criteria of the query itself. We have some data sources here, and when I view the properties of those, I see that it's got a relationship to the location table, and the next one is a relationship to the service address table. So you can see the asset application has a lot of data sources that are related to assets. Scrolling down a little bit, we're on the list view or the list tab for the assets application, and we can see all of the filter fields that are usually presented on the list view. Asset, description, system, business unit, location. We can add columns. All I need to do is open the control palette and grab the table column control and drag it into that grid. And I'll close the control palette, and I need to scroll down so I can use this scroll bar to scroll over, and you can see we've added a new column to this table. It says invalid binding because we haven't bound that to a column on a table yet, but I can do that just for an example. I'll right click, go to properties, and click on the select value for the attribute. So now I'm tying this control to something on the asset table, and I'm just going to pick one at random. Calendar number. Notice that it's changed. It no longer says invalid binding. It knows it's the calendar field. And I can drag this over to another spot in the list if I'd like. Now I've moved it to the left. Notice that it does not have a select value icon next to it. That's because when I scroll down here in the lookup, it's empty. Now I'm pretty sure the calendar attribute on the asset object has a domain associated with it. To tell Maximo to use that domain for a pick list here, I type value list. It gives it the select value control. So this should be fully functional now. But I'm going to delete it. Now I'll select the asset main tab, but I need to use my slider to get over. And this main tab should look familiar if you're used to the asset application. It's just that things look a little bit different because you're looking at it through the application designer. If I wanted to add a new field, I just open up the control palette and I get the type of control that I want. In this case, it's a text box, and I drag it onto the screen. And now I can right click on this control and give it a column name. It's going to be the asset object, and I want that calendar number. And I'll give it value list for the lookup. And there we go. I've added the calendar field to the asset application. And now I'm going to delete it and save it. Obviously there's a lot more to the application designer than what I just showed you, but I hope that's enough to get you at least familiar with what it is and what we can do with it. So let's move on to the next thing in my list is importing and exporting XMLs. Let's say that we've just added our new features to this asset application in the dev environment. Now what I want to do is move these changes to the test environment. All I need to do is click this export application definition, and now we have the XML presented in another browser. I'll right click and save as, and I'll save this XML file in a place where I know to go get it for when I want to import it into the next environment. And now let's pretend I'm in the test environment and I want to import that application definition. I use the import application definition button in the toolbar. I'll go select my file, and here it is, and click open and click OK. And that's how easy it is to export an application definition and import an application definition. And I should mention there are other things stored in the form of XML files that you can import and export. I'll navigate to the applications list view and say select action export system XML, and I get a dialog box of various different types of XMLs that I can export. And these are system-wide XMLs. I have the ability to export the entire list of lookups or the entire list of menus. And I might as well show you some examples of those and some use cases where exporting and importing lookups and menus makes sense here at Grant PUD. Lookups are useful in cases where you need to make some changes to one of those select value dialog boxes. How do I add new columns to that dialog box? You do it through the lookups XML. So I'll go ahead and export lookups XML, and that XML is presented to me in a web page. So here's what I would do: right click, save as, navigate to the folder I want it saved, maybe get a different name. In this case I'm just going to click save. And now I'll go out to where that file was saved, right click on it, and open with Notepad++. And now I can edit this file using Notepad++. and I'm totally just winging this. This could go horribly wrong, but I'm going to come down here to our custom fields, and let's say for instance I wanted to add another column to the dialog box that's presented when you select a pay code. Just like any programming language, XML is very persnickety about the exact syntax that you use when you edit the XML file. And to be honest, I'm not an XML programmer, but I know enough to be dangerous, and I know enough to try this. So I'll just take this row, copy it, and I'll click there, add another row, make sure it's indented the same way the previous row was. Now I need to make sure this row has what it needs. So here's my field that I'm adding. Remember, what I'm trying to do is add another column to that pay code select value dialog box. It's going to have its own column on the table, and I'm just making this up. I'm just going to call it column. And I also need to make sure this is unique. I need to give it a unique number, and I believe the rest of it is good. So now I would save this and then import this into Maximo and try it out. Okay, so that was the application designer and importing and exporting XML files. Next on the list is cron tasks. Cron tasks are in the system configuration menu, and when I do an open search I see there's 66 cron tasks. Almost all of these are out of the box from Maximo. In fact, I don't think we've created any new cron task records. We just piggyback on the existing ones. For example, here's a cron task called escalation. Now I know I haven't talked about escalations yet. My point is you can trigger things from cron tasks. So I'm going to go into this cron task. Looks like it was created just for escalations because that's the name of the cron task. So there are cron task instances here. There's 33 of them that run. And I guess taking a step back, a cron task is basically just something triggered by a combination of a clock and a calendar. There's a schedule for all these things. So let me open up something that's relevant. I think this is it. So here's a cron task instance for closing work orders 90 days after they have been craft comped or comped. And the schedule on this, when I click the set schedule button, I see that it's scheduled once a month on the first day of the month at 2 a.m. it performs an action. And I know from the description the action is to automatically close work orders once they're 90 days past the point in time when they were completed. This one sends a system-wide email at 1 p.m. every day. The next admin topic is escalations. The boilerplate explanation from IBM is it's an automated process that monitors critical tasks and ensure timely actions. Here at Grant PUD, we use escalations for various purposes. I'll show you some examples. This escalation was created for the purpose of notifying a work order owner if their work order is late. Just like all Maximo records, it has an ID and a description, and a site and an org, and an active flag. Escalations typically have a schedule. As you can see, this schedule is run once a day at 7 a.m. Escalations need to be associated with an object. In this case, it's the work order object. The condition is basically a where clause fetching work orders created from or related to a condition report, and the status has been changed to waiting on approval at some point in its life cycle. It has a completion date, it has a supervisor, and the status of this work order is currently not craft comp, or closed, and it's 1 day late. The escalation shows the last time it ran and Escalations have an action or a notification. In this case, it's a notification, and it uses a template. And this is the template. We're going to circle back to communication templates in just a minute, but it uses this communication template to send an email. The other escalation is very similar, except this is based on when the work order is due and what the current date is, and it sends you an email 2 weeks in advance of when your work order is due. Okay, I hope that's enough for now for escalations. Next are conditional expressions. It's in the administration menu. We're using conditional expressions to do things like hide domain values from pick lists, or locking down work orders if you're not a member of a security group. Here's one that was added to various work order security groups. In this case, the expression is fetching work orders created from or related to a condition report. If the expression returns one or more results, then you pass the test. If there's no results, then the condition fails, and the action related to this conditional expression won't be able to be performed. And here's the action that's trying to be performed. This is the chief operator's work order security group, and when I scroll down to the options, this condition that won't let you close or cancel a work order if it's related to or created from a condition report. Let's do another one. GC hide value. We use this one on domains to hide specific values in the pick list. We didn't want this status value used anymore, so we applied this conditional expression. Let's do communication templates next. The communication templates are used for email notifications. They're an easy way to standardize the format and content of frequently used Maximo notifications. Templates can include attachments, links, and information related to the Maximo record which triggered the email notification, like the ID and description of your late work order. This is the communication template used in that late work order notification. Just like most configuration tools in Maximo, it's got an ID and a description and a status. When you create a communication template, you have to tell it what object it'll apply to and how is this template accessible. We usually just leave the default to all, but it could be limited to escalations or workflows. The COM log entry checkbox is checked. That means that there will be a log entry on the work order that triggered this communication template. And then of course there's the email settings like to and from, subject and body. You can see the body of the email includes variables like work order number and description and target completion date. And there's also URLs. Each of the Maximo configuration tools has its own quirks. The quirkiness for COM templates are the recipients. Notice that the to value is cryptic. When I click on the Recipients tab and expand this one, you can see where that to value came from. It's a role. Roles are something I'm supposed to cover, so I'm going to circle back to that. We also have the ability to add individual person records or person groups. Here's another communication template, and this one's interesting because it's triggered from an automation script. The next thing is data restrictions. You won't find data restriction anywhere in the administration menu, but you will find it on security groups. The security groups application has a tab named data restrictions. On that tab there's several sub-tabs. We use the object restrictions, and you can see an object restriction's been added for the service request object, and it uses a conditional expression. Masking the data from the SR object if the status is new or sensitive. And by masking I mean a row is shown on the list view, but it's all X's. You can't see the data. It's literally just all X's. The letter X everywhere on that row. Maximo actions can be triggered in a number of ways. Workflows, escalations, user interface menus, buttons, and many other components. I believe this action sets the value to closed, and it's used on that escalation for the 90-day completed work orders. I believe these two actions were created by Mr. Suresh as part of the FOER work order creation process, where multiple work orders are created and assigned to individual primary foremen. Actions are pretty simple, really. There's your normal ID and description and the object the action will be used against or with, and then the type of action you're creating. Set value is what we normally use. And then the actual value being populated and the field that's being affected. And then of course you can limit this action to be accessible to only escalations or only workflows or all. We touched upon roles a few moments ago. The only role I've ever created is this one, and it just looks at the value in the supervisor field on the work order, and it resolves to a person ID. And I created this role to support the enhancement where the person named as the supervisor on the work order was notified when your work order is late. And roles are really simple. You have the ID and description. You give it a type, an object, and then the value, which is the attribute on that object, and you save it. Maybe I shouldn't have included workflow in this tutorial because we're not currently using it, but there it is in my list. I gotta talk about it. There's actually two applications in the system configuration, platform configuration menu. There's Workflow Designer and Workflow Administration. The Workflow Designer allows you to create a workflow, and the Workflow Administration application allows you to monitor all the workflows. We'll go into Workflow Designer. I'm going to open one kind of at random, and you can see it has an ID and a description and an object, and it keeps track of how many times it's been revised. I'll click on the Canvas tab to show you the actual workflow canvas, and to be honest, I've never actually used this. This is a feature we're not using here at Grant PUD. I think this one came out of the box. You have flowchart icons for tasks, conditions, inputs, processes, and you can drag and drop elements onto the screen and use the connectors to develop the workflow that you need. The workflow engine itself is related to fields and functionality we're not currently using here at Grant PUD, like owner and owner group, and it's designed for a thing called an inbox, which is something you add to your start center. Shows you things assigned to you because you belong to that owner group or you are the owner. And then you will click a button in the toolbar to advance that record into the next stage of the workflow, whatever that is. This is a super flexible configuration tool we can grow into the future. So that covers actions, workflows, and roles. I included security groups in this list of configuration tools because many of these other things in this list are related to security groups, and security groups truly are a building block that we use to configure solutions to business requirements. So I think I'm just going to talk about this one. You've seen examples where we've added a data restriction to a security group, or a conditional expression to one of the permissions within the security groups. All the interesting things about security groups related to permissions and granting permissions is included in the user administration tutorial video. Automation scripts are small targeted pieces of code that extend the functionality of the Maximo asset management system. Scripts can be used to automate routine tasks, implement object rules, and pretty much anything else you can imagine. It's in the Platform Configuration menu. And if I filter the list just for the things we've added, you can see all the custom automation scripts we've developed. There's a script here that sets a field to read only. There are scripts for sending emails if someone changes your labor record. This one creates a log entry on the work order. In this case, the requirement was to keep track of that supervisor value. If it changes, we would add a log entry. Automation script records have an ID and a description. You can choose your programming language, and there's a number of them. I just used Python because that's what Mr. Suresh was using. If you're passing variables in or out of the script, you need to add them to the Variables tab. In this case, it's the supervisor field on the work order. And you give it a launch point. In this case, it's a work order save event where the work order is updated. I hope that's enough about automation scripting, where you know what it is and how we can use it. I hope this tutorial was useful. Have a good day.